c5, and black, by attacking this bishop, managed to save his knight on d1 and emerged okay. So bishop d4 is not really such a good idea. But instead, just bishop f3 is very sensible. And maybe black should play c6 here. There was a game where black played c5. You know, this is one point of rook d8, is the pawn on d6 is protected. And here too, white can get good compensation, like by playing h4, you know, and rook d1. You know, black has kind of helped his structure a bit because the c-pawn on c5 is good now, but his pieces are still poorly coordinated, so I still think white is doing pretty good. Now, Leko played a6, so he's preventing knight b5 once and for all. Rook e1, king h8. I think I read somewhere that Leko played this move quickly, and I don't know if it was preparation or if he had kind of figured out this plan over the board. But one idea is to coordinate the knights by playing the knight back to g8 and maybe to f6, just a matter of if he can implement it. So king h8, rook c1, h4 also looks like a good move. Bishop d7, bishop f3, rook a c8, and now queen b3. So now black's queen side is coming under pressure. And he played b5. Maybe b6 is better because the pawn on a6 is not hanging. But this is still not so easy for black, because white maybe will attack this pawn. And if he pushes it, he can still do knight b5 at some point and have good compensation with his space. You know, black has a real problem because these knights are so bad. It's very strange to see two knights like this that just don't have any squares and have a lot of trouble moving. Leko did b5. And now knight e2. So this is a nice move. Now that b5 has, you know, weakened some squares, the knight goes to e2. It's going to go to d4 to pester the black queen and also eye the weak c6 square. Queen h3, knight d4, bishop to g4, bishop g2. Of course, white's not going to trade bishops. Queen h5. So it seems like black is kind of improving the position of his pieces. You know, maybe he can do knight f5, maybe bishop h3. You know, he controls a lot of the light squares on the king side. So now Carlsen makes a move that looks ugly at first sight, but it's actually a very strong move, and we've seen it's fairly thematic in this variation. He played h4. So the reasoning here is that the g4 square is weakened anyway, but a bishop on g4 by itself isn't going to do much. This move not only stops bishop to h3, but it further restricts black's pieces and gains space. So it's becoming quite difficult. So now black played knight to g8. Knight f5 is more natural, but everything is protected over here. g3 is protected. And here white could do rook c6 like he did in the game, or maybe do knight c6. And the queen is just stuck over here. This is the other problem for black. His queen is kind of cut off on the king side, so it can't help defend the rest of the board where it's needed. But after knight g8, this c6 square, which is weak but couldn't be occupied, suddenly can be occupied because black moved away the knight from e7 and the bishop from d7. So of course white plays rook c6. And this is the thing, you know, he wins the pawn back and he just has a big advantage. And he wins a pawn, it's soon to be two pawns. Knight f6. Rook takes a6. Can't save the b-pawn now. Bishop d7. Knight takes b5. Rook a7 right away is also good. Rook b8. a4. Knight g4. Bishop f3. Pitting the knight. Queen h6. Black's poor queen. It's like nothing to do the whole game. Queen c4. You already hear White could even do bishop g4, queen to c4, followed by taking on c7. Because the weak and light squares on the king side don't really mean anything, because it's just a bishop. This queen can't really get in here. And yet again, I mentioned the sorry knight on g6. So that was another good way to play. But understandably, Carlsen doesn't want to give away the bishop, so queen c4 right away. And really White is just winning now, and he's going to eat up these other pawns on c7 and d6. Taking on b5 isn't really going to help. Just a, b, and then White can pile up on the c pawn, and then the b pawn will queen. So it doesn't really help. Taking on f2 doesn't really help. Just take back. So Leko gets desperate here and sacks a piece, but it doesn't really work. Knight h4. And now if gh, maybe knight f2. So maybe knight f2 right away was a better try to sack the piece. So now he throws in bishop g4, gh, bishop f3 with the idea of queen g6. But now a nice move, f5. So even after this piece sack, Black's queen doesn't really have many squares because White's pawns all control the squares. It looks a little shaky around the White king, but Black is attacking with the queen and bishop, and White, the queen defends along here. These pawns control these squares. White has the e-file. It's just not anywhere near enough. Queen h5, queen f4, bishop takes d5. The pawn wasn't so important. Knight takes c7, hits the bishop. Bishop b7. Even here, just rook takes d6 could be played. Carlsen plays rook b6 to kind of restrict the black pieces. If the bishop moves, White can trade. f6. The rest of the game is just kind of a wipeout. Black's queen is not going to mate the White king by itself. Bishop d4, queen f7. Knight e6, rook g8, king f2, avoiding any opening of the g-file trouble, rook a c8, bishop c3, bishop d5. Almost any position White can take on d6, he just doesn't seem to want to spend the tempo taking the pawn. a5, rook c4. I would guess that maybe White was in time pressure here, because otherwise there's not much reason to play on. Knight d4, queen takes d6 was fine too. Bishop a8, queen d6 finally, queen h5, queen back to f4, rook c to c8, rook b to e6, and now finally Leko resigned. He's down a piece and a pawn with a bad position. All White's pieces are beautiful. Those kings seem to expose. So this was a very convincing victory from Carlsen. Leko doesn't lose a lot of games, and he certainly doesn't lose a lot of games where he's manhandled right out of the opening. And here, he just never got his pieces into the game, which is very rare because Leko, he's a classical player. He typically plays e4, e5, and like the Nimzo and Queen's Indian openings where you usually get your pieces out without much trouble. But here he never found effective squares for his pieces, so a very clever opening choice from Carlsen and a crushing victory. So we'll see how this tournament continues if he can keep it up. So, and thanks for joining us, and hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time on chesslecture.com.